Noah always felt like he didn't belong. In a school where most faces didn't look like his, he stood out, not just because of his skin color but because of the whispered words and sideways glances that followed him down the hallways. He tried to ignore it. He focused on his grades, his love for music, and the small group of friends who saw him for who he was, not just what he looked like. But sometimes, the weight of the stares and the hushed tones became too much to bear. It got worse in high school. People didn't bother to hide their ignorance. Comments like, "You're smart for someone like you," or "Bet you're good at sports, right?" became daily occurrences. It hurt, but he swallowed his feelings, pretending not to care. Until one day, it wasn't just words. After school, Noah found his locker defaced, slurs scratched across the metal, cruel messages meant to hurt. His heart dropped, his hands shaking as he traced the hateful words. His friends were outraged, his teachers were sympathetic, but no one could truly understand the pain that came from being judged for something he couldn't change. That night, he sat at his desk, staring at his homework but unable to focus. He felt small, powerless. And he was tired of pretending it didn't bother him, tired of feeling like he had to be better just to be seen as equal. His mother found him sitting there, silent tears streaming down his face. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight. "They see your color, Noah. But that's not all you are. You're brilliant, kind, talented, and no amount of hate can take that from you." The next day, Noah didn't stay silent. He stood in front of his class, his hands trembling but his voice steady. He spoke about his experiences, about the pain of prejudice, about the weight of being seen as different. He didn't ask for pity. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted change. His words hung heavy in the room. For the first time, people listened, not just to his voice but to his story. They saw him, truly saw him, beyond the color of his skin. The school launched an anti-bullying campaign, bringing in speakers to educate students about racism and prejudice. Noah became a voice for change, not just in his school but in his community. But change didn't happen overnight. There were setbacks. Some students mocked his efforts, calling him overly sensitive or saying he was making a big deal out of nothing. But Noah didn't back down. With each speech he gave, with each story he shared, more people began to understand. Some even apologized, realizing the impact of their words and actions. Noah started a support group for students who felt marginalized. They met every week, sharing their experiences, their fears, their hopes. They didn't just talk about racism, they talked about identity, self-worth, and finding strength in who they were. The group grew, students of all backgrounds joining, wanting to learn, wanting to be allies. One day, Noah was invited to speak at a community event. He stood on the stage, looking out at a crowd that once would have made him feel small. But now he felt powerful. Not because he had all the answers, but because he had the courage to speak his truth. As he shared his story, he saw tears in the eyes of some audience members. Parents thanked him afterward, telling him his words helped them understand what their own children were going through. Teachers approached him, asking how they could make their classrooms more inclusive. Noah realized that his pain had a purpose. His experiences, as hurtful as they were, had given him a voice strong enough to break barriers and build bridges. He was no longer just the boy who didn't belong. He was a leader. And his story was just beginning. As time went on, Noah's influence grew. He began collaborating with other schools, bringing his message of empathy and understanding to wider audiences. He spoke at conferences, workshops, and community gatherings. Each time, his words resonated, breaking down walls of ignorance and planting seeds of change. Noah's support group turned into an organization advocating for educational reforms that promoted inclusivity and diversity. They created programs that celebrated cultural differences, fostering environments where every student felt valued and understood. His impact reached beyond his community. Local news stations picked up his story, calling him a voice for a new generation. He was invited to speak on panels, to share his experiences on podcasts, and to collaborate with authors on books about social justice and identity. Despite his growing influence, Noah remained humble. He visited his old school often, mentoring younger students who were struggling with their identity or facing similar prejudices. He listened to their stories, reminded them of their worth, and helped them find their own voices. One evening, Noah stood before a packed auditorium, preparing to give the keynote speech at a National Youth Leadership Summit. As he looked out at the eager faces before him, he felt a wave of gratitude. The boy who once felt invisible had become a beacon of hope. Taking a deep breath, he began, "I once thought my differences were my weaknesses. But I learned that they are my strengths. Our stories have power, and when we share them, we can change the world." The audience erupted into applause, a standing ovation echoing through the hall. In that moment, Noah knew his journey was far from over. He was still that boy who once felt like he didn't belong. But now, he was teaching the world to belong to each other. And that, he realized, was the greatest change of all.